Welcome back to Balmer's Workshop. Thanks so much for joining me here once again. It is always great to have you back. So I was contacted by a customer recently telling me that he had found the limits of my Suzuki Sidekick front bumper. That surprised me. They are ultra stout, and I've always said you could basically hang them from a crane and use them as a wrecking ball, and the last thing on that vehicle that would survive would be the bumper and the frame horns to which it was attached. So I was shocked to hear that he was able to find the limits, as he said, but then he sent me a video, and what it is he was using his Sidekick for plowing snow. He was making some money plowing parking lots with it, and it was working great for that. He found a little plow called a sport plow, which installs into the 2-inch receiver, which is stock on my, which is included on all my Sidekick bumpers, and it was doing a phenomenal job for him, and again, he was making a lot of money at it. However, he was going a little quicker than he probably should have been, and he hit an obstacle underneath the snow at speed, and he says, according to him, he hit it so hard that the vehicle virtually did an endo. And yes, indeed, he found the limits of my bumper brackets. So he's bent the brackets, my bumper brackets attached to the stock locations to locate the bumper. All 4 of the stock bolts were torn off, or they were sheared off. But more importantly, I weld frame plates to the front of the frames on the 2-door models, which house 3 half-inch grade 8 nuts on each of those frame plates to which the bumper itself mounts. Now, I couldn't imagine how that would have bent, but the bracket itself did bend. We'll show you that. But more importantly, the frame of the vehicle absolutely buckled as well. So yes, he found the limits of my bumper, but he also found the limits of the frame of the vehicle, and they are pretty similarly matched. So we'll have a look at it now, and we'll take the bumper off and really check the extent of the damage and see what we can do to repair it for him. And there you are. That is a heck of an angle for my bumper to be on. So you can see just how much he's managed to tweak that frame and the bumper brackets. If we take a look here, I'll use my work light. You can see that the frame itself is completely pushed in and buckled backwards, and unfortunately the bracket is bent as well. Now the top plate of the bracket there didn't bend, so I'm going to be able to probably keep that, and the side plate should be good as well, because all that happened there is we sheared off the stock 8mm bolts. So I should be able to keep all of that, and it will only be these back plates that you can see there where the bolts are actually going through, which I'll have to replace, I believe. And then what we're going to do is weld them on potentially at a different angle so that we don't have to restore the frame. Trying to pull the frame out without a frame straightener would be virtually impossible for me, and I don't want to have to cut the front of the frame out and replace all that material. I don't think it'll work real well to do that. So we're going to take the bumper off, cut the brackets apart, and then we'll see what we can do to mount the bumper in its correct position with those frame horns still bent. I'll show you what I mean as we go on. So let's have a closer look together at the issue here. You can see that it has not been bent forward evenly. I believe he must have hit the object on the driver's side of the vehicle, because this side is pitched down considerably more, as you can probably see on camera. Because the bumper has been forced down the way it has pitched the ends up, the sides or the ends up, and they have broken the grille on both sides. So he's going to need a new grille if he wants it to look stock again. The ends, let me get a light up in there for you. The ends of my mounts that go into the stock bumper locations have actually cut into the body up there, but I don't anticipate that's going to cause much issue. You can see that it's lifted that body mount up a little bit, which will probably collapse again once we take the bumper off. So the thing for me to do now, obviously, is to pull the bumper off by removing my 6 grade 8 half-inch bolts, which are up in there. That's going to be a little bit challenging to do now that the bumper is in the position it is, but shouldn't be too bad. So we'll get all those off. We'll remove the bumper. So once the bumper's off, of course, we will drill and use some easy outs to remove the broken bolts that are in the stock locations, and then we'll kind of assess the rest of this job and figure out exactly where we're going to go from there. But gives you a decent look at the damage that was done anyway. Hopefully we can restore this right back to original. And once again, my little bumper trolley comes in very handy indeed. The tool has been featured in many of my videos. It's adjustable in height thanks to the hydraulic bottle jack, which allows for effortless alignment with the vehicle mounts when installing one of my Balmer Fab bumpers, and it's also adjustable in terms of pitch so that a bumper can be positioned to perfectly match the rake of a vehicle. It's even got a parts tray to store all of my installation hardware and gives me a place to set my tools. In this case, however, the pitch adjustment has allowed me to remove even this massively tweaked bumper with ease. The trolley is one of those items that I'm very thankful to myself for building because it just makes shop life so much easier. All right, so with the bumper removed, let's have a better look at these frame horns. So these are supposed to sit perfectly vertical, 90 degrees to the ground, and they are far off of that. You can see the amount of damage that has been done to this frame horn. It's absolutely smashed in at the bottom. It's even separated the two layers of steel a little bit there, all buckled up on the side here, and it's actually buckled right where the bolts go through, so the captive nuts that used to be welded on there from factory are now gone. So we're going to have to do something about that. But like I said, we're going to try to kind of leave the frame horns as is because I really don't see a reasonable way to restore those. And we'll make the changes on the bumper itself. Over on this side, the captive nuts seem to have held in place. They've definitely taken a very hard hit, and they're deformed. So once I drill and tap these, the remainders of these bolts out of there, I wonder if in fact the captive nuts will let loose. The welded nuts on the backside will let loose. So again, we may have to take a new approach on both of the outsides of the brackets. We'll leave these guys as is if we possibly can, and we'll make the changes here on the bumper. So you can see, again, just how deformed that is. That's meant to be a true 90 degrees to the top plate there, and it is far from it. So we're going to have to cut this back plate out completely on both sides, and then we'll basically remount the bumper once I've restored the stock mounting points. And then we'll see what we can do to get a plate, a front plate back in place again, so that it matches the angle that now exists on the front of the vehicle while the bumper is still in its correct position. So let's move forward with that. All right, so I have cut that back plate off of one side, but not the other. I'll do that one on time lapse so you can have a quick peek at that. Now, while I was doing that, I was kind of obviously paying more attention to this side than the other side, and I noticed, you can probably see it here, that the bracket is actually, the side bracket there is actually pointed down at the back. So it's down at this end, and that's obviously from the impact as well. What's happened is that the very bottom corner there has pushed in on the bumper, and you can actually see, if you look very, very carefully, that the top of that weld has a very small crack in it as well. So a hell of a lot of force has been applied to that point, and we actually have some deformation there. And then when I come over to this side, you can see it more so. Look at it compared to the side of the bumper there, how drastically that's down. And again, right down in that corner is where we've got a bit of a dent and maybe just the tiniest little crack starting to appear at the top of that weld. So there's been, like I said, a tremendous amount of force applied to those points, and those have deformed as well. Rather than replacing them, what I think I will do is either weld them to the sides of the frame horns if the customer allows, or otherwise we'll mount the bumper in its correct position. We'll drill a hole right through the middle of this guy. We'll mark that position on the vehicle, and then we'll put a captive nut inside of the frame so that we can bolt it up with one single side bolt on each side, and we'll go to a larger size, and we'll reinforce that frame plate a little bit to make sure that it's good and solid. Otherwise, like I said, we can just weld it directly on, but these bolt holes will no longer line up. That's a guarantee. So I'm not going to worry about trying to restore the welded nuts or the captive nuts on the frame side, because that will be pointless. We'll just either, like I said, drill a hole through the center of that guy or weld it on completely. But let's go ahead and remove this back plate. I still need to clean up underneath this top plate. what I'll do is flip the bumper upside down on the stand. I need to punch mark it and drill it out and tap those holes for a skid plate as well. He wants to add a skid plate, which is going to protect the bottom of the radiator, and it's also going to mount into the frame down in these points here just above the suspension mounts, and that's going to give him some reinforcement for the bumper in addition to the stock mounts, or I shouldn't say the stock mounts, in addition to the mounts that I make here that you can see in place. I finished cleaning up those brackets and they are now prepped for welding. So long as things line up okay, we will weld both sides, meaning top or bottom and top, since the bumper's upside down right now, to make things as strong as possible. And we'll also weld inside and outside on the back plate once it's in position. Again, we'll probably drill through the side here or maybe weld the bracket in terms of the side positioning. I believe my customer has responded to a message I sent him, so we'll check and see what he wants me to do. And then the other thing is, if you remember, I was going to drill the bottom of the bumper out to accept one of my skid plates, and I have done myself the favor of doing that in advance. Normally, I do drill my bumpers out to accept a skid plate, even if the customer isn't buying one at first, just in case they buy one later. But in the olden days, I didn't do that. And this is a pretty old bumper, so I thought that it probably wouldn't have the holes, but luckily it does. So that's a job saved. Now we can just bolt the skid plate straight up to it. And I have the skid plate sitting right over here, so I'll quickly show you that. There's Jerry. So that's the skid plate. Has the logo cut into it. It has access for the receiver, because of course the receiver pin is on the back side of the bumper, so you've got to have holes to reach through to get to the bumper, or to the receiver rather. You can see there that are the holes that it's going to mount into the bumper, and then these holes here are going to be secured with 1/2-inch grade 8 bolts, and they will secure to nuts which are going to be welded to the suspension members here. So stay tuned for that, and that's going to stiffen up the bumper a little bit. I've also added a side or a back plate, sorry, there in position. I will do the same over here, and then we'll put the bumper in place and basically have a look at its attitude, try to get it sitting exactly where I want it, and maybe we'll tack weld those plates into the bumper brackets so that we've got our positioning correct. And after that, I'll worry about the side locations. Here's a comparison between a brand new back plate and the one that came off the bumper. Check out the warpage on that. So that's 1/4-inch mild steel, and it was fully gusseted on 2 sides. So you can see the kind of the force that was applied to that thing. Really, really extreme. He really must have endoed that little rig in order to provide that kind of deflection. Well, let's see what we can do to sort it out. All right, so I have tacked it in place, and I used a couple of stands, as you can see, as well as my trolley to make sure that I was sitting exactly as I wanted. I put an angle finder on the top there. It's turned off right now, but we can turn that back on. You can see I'm up by 0.38 of a degree on this side of the vehicle. The vehicle itself is up by just over 0.2 of a degree. So normally I would match that exactly even. But when I go down and I look at the line between my grill tube and the grill itself, and I try to make that absolutely as flat as possible, this was my best look. So I've got about a 0.18 of a degree discrepancy between the way that the truck sits and the way that the bumper sits. Very, very minor, but it gives a nice clean look. If you look at the grill line, there is a bigger gap on this side than on this side, but that's because the grill is all broken and kind of pushed down there. All right, so the bumper is tacked in place. I obviously have those front plates in behind the bumper there, and they are tacked now to the side plates. I used a couple of stands, as you can see, to make sure the bumper was sitting dead level, even though I used my trolley to set it in place. I like to set the what I refer to as the roll angle using the stands, just so I know that it won't shift when I'm getting ready to weld. I set it at 0.39 of a degree up to the driver's side of the vehicle. Reason being is the vehicle itself sits up to the driver's side by 0.2 or just over 0.2 on this side. And then In addition to that 0.2, I've added another basically 0.2 of a degree, and the reason being is if you look at the way that the grill tube lines up with the grill itself, it just looks nice and even right here, where when I was down at 0.2 on the bumper, it was just the tiniest bit off. So the little discrepancies bother me, and I like it to look as clean as it can, and I think it does that now. This side of the grill has a smaller gap than that side. I should say the gap between the bumper and the grill is smaller on that side than it is on that side, but the reason is because the grill has been broken more on this side and it's just pushed down a little more. But in terms of our grill lines in the center and the actual bulkhead of the vehicle, they're nice and dead even with the grill tube now. So I was happy to go ahead and tack that up. And speaking of tacks, have a quick look under here. You can see the new front plate in place there, and you can see my tack welds into the side plate, and of course it's exactly the same over on the other side. So now I can remove my stands and remove the bolts out of those mounts and pull the bumper forward on off of the vehicle, and then we'll be left with some really ugly gaps between the back plates and the top plates of these brackets, which we'll go over once I've removed this bumper, and we'll fix that up as well and solidify everything, make that nice and strong, and then we'll figure out what to do with those side plates. And there is the back side of the bumper, and there are the gaps that remain. So obviously when these brackets were smashed downwards, they pulled, and of course these guys dropped as well, and the combination of those two things are what creates that gap. The gap is not perfectly even, and it's not identical to what's on this side. Normally when I see things that aren't even and aren't identical, that raises a ton of red flags, and I have to start doing a bunch of checks to make sure of where that discrepancy is coming from. But in this case, we know, as I pointed out at the beginning of the video, that this thing didn't deform symmetrically at all. So I'm just going to trust that those are in the position where they need to be, because of course they were bolted up and tacked in place. And now what I have done is just cut myself 2 pieces of 1/4 inch thick flat bar. It's 1 inch wide and it's 6 3/4 inches long to correspond with my brackets. I'm simply going to slide it up in behind and tack it in place just like so. Very, very straightforward. It's going to bring the strength right back to this thing. It's going to be welded all the way down the side as well as on both sides, top and bottom, so it'll be rock solid. And that should pretty much fix the issue, and then we'll move on to the sides. You can see I've got a little cross there where I'm going to drill a new hole. That's basically centered on the side panel of the vehicle frame. So that's as much, gives me as much leeway in each direction as I can reasonably get. Once I've drilled that out, I think I'll go to 3/8 or just slightly more than 3/8, 25/64 or 13 30 seconds to give myself that little bit of play when I put a 3/8 bolt through it. But that will then give me a spot to mark on the vehicle. We'll remove the bumper again. I'll center punch the mark on the vehicle, and we'll work on installing a captive nut, a welded nut into the frame to give ourselves a new side mount again. Tacked in place. And again, not symmetrical side to side, but it doesn't matter. I've test fitted it and it fits up really nicely. So we have restored the brackets with the same thickness of material. I'm going to weld both welds on both sides, and also this weld here will be double-sided. So it's going to be returned to its original strength in terms of the bumper itself. The vehicle remains a little bit compromised. I mean, in terms of strength, because that's been deformed, I don't imagine it's going to be quite as strong as it used to be. But without fully rebuilding these frame horns, there's nothing else I can really do for the customer. So, I think the amount of strength that he's lost is going to be very minimal. We'll open up some holes in these side plates of the frame here, and we'll install some captive hardware. I've already drilled out the hole for that. I didn't want to use either of the original holes because they were just going to come too close to the edges of the side plate on the vehicle, so then I wouldn't have had a decent area to weld, so that's why I went for a more central position. But yeah, I think we're pretty much back to normal with the bumper. There should be really no compromises on that end, even though the angles have changed drastically. It should be just as strong as it ever was. And the vehicle has not been compromised very much. I think it's really not going to be an issue. My welds didn't crack in the slightest on the vehicle. We've got the tiniest little cracks in the corners here, but given that we've still got a full bead all the way along there and all the way down and on the insides, I'm not going to worry about those. I guess I might, maybe I will go over these actually. Maybe I'll get the powder coat off of there and go over these corners just to be absolutely sure those cracks don't continue. It's probably not a bad idea. Other than that, I don't think I'm going to worry about anything else on the bumper. We've got those holes open up on the bottom. We're ready for the skid plate. So I'm now going to fully weld this guy. Then we'll mount it onto the vehicle. We'll mark the holes and for the side location or the side mount locations, and then we'll drill those out, and then we'll move on to mounting the skid plate. All right, so there it is back on the vehicle. I lied a little bit. I didn't end up welding everything solid yet. You can see it's still all just tacked together. I just wanted to be absolutely sure everything fit up perfect, fully bolted and installed before I did that. And you can see I'll have no interference issues at all with that piece that I'm going to add. Obviously the same on this side, but let's have a look at just how extreme the damage was. Sorry about having the light in the background there. Hopefully you can still get an idea of where we're at here. This bracket was supposed to come out, let me hold that light in my other hand. This bracket was supposed to come out at 90 degrees to the bumper. You can see it's off by, I would say, probably 15 degrees. So that has definitely punched in the bottom of that bumper more than I originally thought. But again, I think, you know, it hasn't compromised the strength of the bumper itself a lot as far as I can tell. This plate is now again on at least a 15-degree angle, so it was a combined 30, maybe 40 degrees that this thing had deflected. But it's fitting up really nice. You know, it's ugly under here, but as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty well fixed. And on both sides, like I said, I've got this 3/8 hole, well, it's actually 13/32 hole drilled out for a 3/8 bolt, and I've center punched inside of there. So now I'll remove the bumper. I'll take a hole saw, probably a 1 1/4 or maybe 1.5 inch hole saw, and I'll bore a hole in there. Then we'll take a plate, weld a captive nut, 3/8 nut to the back side of it, hold it in position and weld it up in place, sand it flat, and then we can reinstall the bumper with that as a side support on both sides. All right, so the first of the frame side plates has been repaired. Now ignore all this nasty, ugly, squashed steel. All I did was kind of pound that in with a hammer so I had a decently flat side to work with so that this wouldn't impede the bracket going on. The bracket's going to cover all of that, and I'm really not concerned about the look of it at all. No need to spend the customer's money just fixing up the look of a side panel that's going to be hidden by a bracket anyway. The important thing is to give ourselves a strong mounting point on the side as well as the front. So this time we have gone from the stock 8mm bolts ×2 to a 3/8 bolt ×1, but it's been secured with a 3/16 thick plug back there, and then the nut is welded to the back side of it, and that plug is welded into the frame plate. So I'm now going to show you how I did that on the other side. So here's a slug. Now what this is it's just the slug from a hole saw cutting. So when I've used a hole saw to cut through some 3/16 material, that's what this is from. It was a 1 1/4 inch hole saw, so slightly less than 1 1/4 inch or outside diameter on this slug. And then I opened up the center hole, which was originally 1/4 inch to 3/8, and I welded a 3/8 nut to the back side of it there. Pretty straightforward. Then I used a 1 inch hole saw to cut a hole in the side of the frame plate, and I notched it out in the same width as the thickness of the material, and the same, I gave myself a gap that's the same width as the thickness of the material, and I made the gap wide enough, of course, for the slug to slot right in there. So we just simply pop that in and around like so, pull it back into place, and I can tack weld that once I'm happy that I've got the bolt centered, and then we'll fully weld it like you saw on the other side, and we've got a really nice solid mount again. So that is the deal there. Pretty straightforward, and a good way to fix something like that, in my opinion. And there we are. It is all welded up and done. I meant to take a video before I painted it, but I forgot. So that's what you get to see. But there you are. That one little 1-inch strip worked really great for these gaps. Some of the gap is considerably less than 1 inch, but the overlap is no big deal. Everything has worked out very well. The vehicle's all painted up as well. And we are ready to remount the bumper using the original 3 bolts per side, which I added when I built the bumper initially, and also our new side mounts as well. And then we'll add the skid plate on once it comes back from powder coat. For now, it's just sitting there in bare steel, but we'll get that powder coated for him. We just spray painted these guys because to have this bumper sent out and burned off and sandblasted and reprimed, recoated would be a whole lot of money. So we just went with the simpler solution of spray painting the brackets, spray painting the truck, and we'll just have to do that, or the customer rather will have to do that probably about once a year to make sure that it stays reasonably rust-free. But that's it. That's how you fix a damaged frame and a damaged bumper. Again, really surprised that, well, I shouldn't say I'm really surprised the bumper didn't hold up to that. I mean, that's just a catastrophic smash-ola of an accident. So, you know, if the frame failed at the same time the bumper failed, I think that the bumper is definitely strong enough. So anyway, let's get this thing back on the vehicle, call up the customer, and move on with the next job, which is this boat. And that is that. All done and back together and looking just the way it should. Nice and even with the fender line. From the front, it looks a little odd. This side looks a little bit high when you compare the headlight hoop to the top of the grille there, as compared to that side. But then again, it looks a little low as compared to the grille down here. Again, judging by that side. So what I did is I just tried to get that grille tube as flat as possible according to the grille lines. I think it's turned out really well. As you saw earlier, we added the grade 8 3/8 bolts to the side plates, and we've still got our 3 1/2-inch bolts holding it onto the front. Skid plate is all done and ready for powder coat. I think that I have a video clip already with that on there. If I forgot to take a video clip with the skid plate in place, then I will put a picture of it in place now so you can see what that looks like. But basically, this job is done. So Trevor can get back out there and do some more plowing with this thing if he wants to.
And plow he did. Thanks so much for joining me here at Balmer's Workshop once again. Please come back next time when Judy will be back, and we'll have a little more fun with our own project Sidekick. Take care, be well, we'll see you soon.